and that, Claire thought, was more than enough. Every morning at 5 o'clock, before the sun even thought about rising, Lynn would slip through the back entrance of the Westbrook Music Academy. Her footsteps echoed softly in the empty hallways, as she carried her cleaning supplies, moving like a ghost through a world that belonged to other people during the day. She was 43 years old, though her hands looked much older. Years of scrubbing floors and polishing wood had left them rough and cracked, with calluses that told the story of a life spent working hard for little recognition. Her hair was starting to show gray at the temples, pulled back in a simple ponytail that she never changed. She wore the same navy blue uniform every day, with her name tag pinned slightly crooked on her chest. Lynn had one job that mattered more to her than all the others. Every morning, after she mopped the hallways and wiped down the practice rooms, she would enter the grand concert hall. This was where the academy held its performances, where students showcased their talents to proud parents and important guests. And right in the center of that hall sat the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was a massive instrument, black and glossy, with ivory keys that gleamed even in the dim morning light. Lynn would spend extra time here, carefully dusting every surface, polishing the wood until it reflected her face back at her. Sometimes she would pause, her cloth hovering over the keys, and she would imagine what it might feel like to actually press them down to create those sounds she heard echoing through the building all day long. But she never did. She wasn't allowed to. The pianos were for students, for teachers, for people who had paid thousands of dollars to learn music. Not for the cleaning lady who barely spoke English and had never had a music lesson in her entire life. What nobody at the academy knew was that Lynn understood music better than most of them ever would. It lived inside her like a secret language, one she had been learning since she was a small child growing up in a tiny village outside Shanghai. Her village had been so poor that most families couldn't afford proper shoes for their children. Electricity came and went, depending on whether the old generator was working. There were no computers, no televisions, barely any books. But once a month, a music teacher from the city would visit the community center and give lessons to anyone who could pay. Lynn's family could never pay. Her father worked in the rice fields from dawn until dark, and her mother took in sewing to earn a few extra yuan. They had 6 children to feed, and music lessons were as impossible as buying a car or taking a vacation. Those things simply didn't exist in their world. But Lynn had discovered something magical when she was 7 years old. If she sat very quietly against the wall of the community center during the music lessons, she could hear everything. The wall was thin, and the sound carried perfectly. She would press her small ear against the rough concrete and close her eyes, absorbing every note, every instruction, every correction the teacher gave to the students inside. For 3 years, she did this. Once a month, she would sit outside that building for 2 hours, listening. The other children in the village thought she was strange. They would run by, playing games and climbing trees. But Lynn stayed perfectly still, her ear pressed to the wall, her eyes closed in concentration. She learned to hear the difference between right notes and wrong notes. She understood when the teacher explained about rhythm, about tempo, about the way emotions could be expressed through something as simple as how hard or soft you touch the keys. In her mind, she began to play along, her fingers moving in her lap as if touching invisible keys. When she was 10, the music teacher stopped coming. The government had closed the program, saying there wasn't enough money. Lynn cried for 3 days, but by then, something had taken root inside her so deep that nothing could remove it. Music was part of her now, woven into the way she thought and felt and saw the world. As she grew older, life swept her along like a river current she couldn't resist. She left school at 14 to work in a factory. At 24, she married a kind man who worked in construction. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of a better life somewhere far away. When she was 25, they finally had enough money to immigrate to America. She remembered arriving in Los Angeles with 2 suitcases and hearts full of hope. They had believed everything they'd heard about America being the land of opportunity, where anyone could become anything if they worked hard enough. Reality hit them fast and hard. Without perfect English, without college degrees, without connections, the only opportunities available were the ones nobody else wanted. Lynn took a job cleaning houses. Then she cleaned offices. Then she worked at a restaurant, washing dishes until her hands were permanently wrinkled from the hot water. Her husband found work on construction sites, sending money back home to help his aging parents. They lived in a tiny apartment with 3 other families, sleeping in the living room on a mattress they rolled up every morning. The years passed in a blur of exhaustion and routine. Wake up before dawn, work all day, come home to a dinner of rice and whatever cheap vegetables were on sale, fall asleep to the sound of neighbors arguing through thin walls, dream of something better, but never quite believing it could happen. When she was 35, she finally got the job at Westbrook Music Academy. It felt like fate, like the universe had remembered that 7-year-old girl with her ear pressed against the wall and was giving her a gift. She would be surrounded by music again, even if she could never make it herself. The students who rushed past her in the hallways never really saw her. To them, she was just part of the building, like the water fountains or the exit signs. They were mostly rich kids, children of lawyers and doctors and business owners, teenagers, who complained about their expensive instruments and their demanding teachers while Lynn scrubbed the floors beneath their feet. She didn't resent them. How could she? They were living the life she had once dreamed of. Instead, she listened. As she cleaned the practice rooms, she would hear them playing their scales, struggling through difficult passages, sometimes making beautiful music and sometimes creating terrible noise. She learned to recognize which students had real talent and which ones were just going through the motions because their parents forced them. Sometimes, late at night when everyone had gone home, Lynn would stand in the doorway of the concert hall and stare at that beautiful grand piano. Her fingers would twitch at her sides, aching to touch those keys, to find out if the music she heard so clearly in her mind could actually come out in the real world. But she never crossed that invisible line. She knew her place. She was the cleaning lady, and the piano was not for her. 16 years she worked there. 16 years of invisible days of listening to other people make music, of going home to her small apartment and humming melodies while she cooked dinner. Her husband had died 5 years ago, a fall from a construction scaffold that took him from her in an instant. Now she lived alone with only the music in her head for company. She had learned to be content with this small life. She had learned not to want things that weren't meant for her. She had buried that 7-year-old girl with the big dreams so deep that she almost forgot she had ever existed. But some things, once awakened, never truly sleep. They just wait for the right moment to remind you they're still there, still alive, still possible. For Lynn, that moment was coming sooner than she could have ever imagined. The invitation came, on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped under Lynn's supply closet door like it was some kind of mistake. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering at the top. The annual donor gala, the biggest event of the year at Westbrook Music Academy. And they needed extra serving staff. Lynn picked up the notice and read it slowly, her finger tracing under each word. The gala was in 3 days. They were offering double pay for anyone willing to work the evening shift, serving drinks and clearing tables for the wealthy donors who kept the academy running. She needed the money. Her rent had gone up again last month, and her savings account was looking dangerously thin. She signed her name on the volunteer sheet and tried not to think about how strange it would feel to be in that concert hall at night, with all those important people, serving them champagne while they celebrated a world she could only observe from the outside. The night of the gala arrived faster than she expected. Lynn reported to the kitchen at 5 in the evening, where a catering manager she'd never met before handed her a crisp white serving uniform and a black bow tie. She struggled with the tie for 10 minutes in the bathroom, her rough fingers fumbling with the smooth fabric until another worker took pity on her and tied it properly. By 7 o'clock, the guests were arriving. Lynn watched from behind the kitchen doors as they swept into the building, the women in glittering gowns that probably cost more than Lynn made in a year, the men in perfectly tailored suits. They moved, with a confidence she had never possessed, laughing loudly, air-kissing each other's cheeks, speaking in voices that expected to be heard. The concert hall had been transformed into something magical. Crystal chandeliers blazed with light overhead. Round tables draped in white linen surrounded a temporary stage where student musicians would perform throughout the evening. And there, Spotlit at the center of it all sat the grand piano Lynn had polished 1,000 times. Tonight it looked like a jewel, its black surface reflecting the chandeliers like a mirror. Lynn's job was simple. Carry trays of champagne glasses through the crowd, offer them with a smile, move on. Don't make eye contact for too long. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be invisible, helpful, efficient. She had been invisible her whole life. This should have been easy. For the first 2 hours, everything went smoothly. The guests drank and ate and barely noticed her. A few students performed, playing pieces by Mozart and Beethoven with varying degrees of skill. The crowd applauded politely, more interested in their conversations and their phones than in the music. Lynn found herself getting lost in the performances, even the mediocre ones. She would pause at the edge of the room, her tray balanced on one hand, and listen. She could hear where the students made mistakes, where they rushed through difficult passages, where they played the notes correctly but missed the emotion entirely. Her fingers would twitch slightly at her sides, imagining how she would play those same pieces differently. Then, around 9:30, everything changed. A group of men had gathered near the stage, their faces flushed from too much expensive wine. Lynn recognized one of them immediately, Mr. Pemberton. He was on the Academy's board of trustees, a real estate developer who had made his fortune building shopping malls and luxury apartments. His son attended the Academy, though everyone knew the boy had no real talent. He was there because his father's donations bought him a place. Mr. Pemberton was loud, the kind of man who thought volume equaled importance. He had just sat through another student performance, a nervous girl who had stumbled through a Chopin piece, and he was complaining loudly to his companions. These kids today, they have every advantage and still can't play worth a damn, he announced, gesturing with his wineglass. Back in my day, you either had talent or you didn't waste everyone's time. His friends laughed, though Lynn noticed some of them looked uncomfortable. One of them pointed out that Mr. Pemberton's own son had performed earlier that evening, and perhaps he shouldn't be too critical. This only made Mr. Pemberton louder and more defensive. At least my boy tries, he said. At least he's up there making an effort. I bet half the people in this room couldn't play a single note if you put them at that piano. That's when his eyes landed on Lynn. She was standing about 10 feet away, holding an empty tray, trying to decide whether to go back to the kitchen or wait for the next performance to start. She felt his gaze on her like a spotlight, and something cold settled in her stomach. You there, he called out, snapping his fingers in her direction like she was a dog. The cleaning woman. Yes, you. Come here. Lynn's legs felt like they had forgotten how to work properly, but she moved forward anyway. Years of obeying people in positions of power had trained her body to respond even when her mind was screaming at her to run. She stopped a respectful distance from the group, her eyes down, her empty tray held in front of her like a shield. Do you play piano? Mr. Pemberton asked. His tone made it clear this was not a genuine question. This was the setup for something, though Lynn couldn't yet see what. She shook her head slightly. No, sir. Of course not, he said, and his friends chuckled. But surely you must know something about music. You work here, don't you? You must hear it all day long. Can't you play even a little bit? Lynn wanted to disappear. She could feel other people nearby turning to watch, sensing entertainment. Her face felt hot and her hands were shaking slightly as they gripped the tray. I don't have training. Sir, she said quietly, hoping that would end it. But Mr. Pemberton was drunk and bored and cruel in the particular way that people with too much power and too little empathy can be. He had found his entertainment for the evening and he wasn't going to let it go. Nonsense, he declared loudly. Everyone should be able to play something. Tell you what, let's make this interesting. Someone get that old piano from the back. The broken one we're throwing out. Let's see what our cleaning lady can do. A murmur went through the nearby crowd. Some people laughed. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. A few took out their phones, already anticipating something worth recording. Lynn felt like she was watching this happen to someone else, like she was floating somewhere above her body, observing a scene from a movie. 2 Academy staff members, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but afraid to refuse a major donor, disappeared backstage. Lynn could hear them rolling something heavy across the floor. A moment later, they emerged with the practice piano from the storage room. She had seen this piano before, pushed into a corner where old music stands and broken chairs went to wait for disposal. It was an upright, old and battered, with keys that were chipped and yellowed like bad teeth. The wood was scratched and faded, and one of the legs had been repaired with duct tape. It hadn't been tuned in years, maybe decades. It was scheduled to be thrown away next week. They positioned it awkwardly near the stage, not quite on it, but close enough that everyone could see. The contrast between this sad, broken instrument and the beautiful grand piano behind it was almost painful. It looked like a beggar standing next to a king. Mr. Pemberton gestured grandly toward it, like he was presenting a prize. There you go. Play us something, anything, just a few notes. Come on, don't be shy. The crowd had grown now. At least 50 people had gathered to watch, forming a loose circle around Lynn and the broken piano. She could see phones raised, recording. She could see smiles that weren't kind, eyes bright with the anticipation of watching someone fail. This was meant to be a joke, a moment of cruelty disguised as fun, something they could laugh about later over expensive cocktails. Lynn looked at the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every survival instinct she had was screaming at her to walk away, to preserve what little dignity she had left, to go back to being invisible. But something else was happening inside her too. That 7-year-old girl, the one she had buried so deep, was waking up. And she was angry, not at Mr. Pemberton specifically, but at every door that had been closed in her face, every dream she had swallowed, every time she had made herself small to fit into a world that had no space for her. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady as she set down her tray on a nearby table. They were steady as she walked toward the broken piano and pulled out the bench. They were steady as she sat down, her back straight, her fingers hovering over the damaged keys. The room was completely silent now, everyone waiting for the humiliation to begin. Lynn closed her eyes and took one deep breath. Then she began to play. The first note that came from the broken piano shouldn't have been beautiful. The instrument was damaged, out of tune, neglected for years. But somehow, when Lynn's finger pressed down on that first key, the sound that emerged was like a voice finding its way out of a long silence. She started with something simple, a melody from her childhood, a folk song her mother used to sing while hanging laundry in the morning sun, back in that village where music lessons were impossible dreams. The notes were soft at first, hesitant, like she was testing whether this was really happening or just another daydream while she mopped floors. The crowd was still expecting a disaster. She could feel their anticipation, their phones pointed at her, waiting to capture the moment when this cleaning woman embarrassed herself. Mr. Pemberton had a smirk on his face, already enjoying his joke, but then something shifted in the room. Lynn's fingers began to move with more confidence. The simple folk melody transformed, grew more complex. Her left hand joined her right, adding depth and harmony that shouldn't have been possible for someone who claimed to have no training. The broken piano, despite its flaws, began to sing under her touch. She could feel where the keys stuck, where the strings were out of tune. But instead of fighting against these imperfections, she worked with them. When a note came out flat, she adjusted the ones around it. When a key responded slowly, she gave it an extra moment. She was having a conversation with this broken instrument, speaking its language, understanding its pain. The folk song melted into something else. Chopin. A nocturne that she had heard a student practicing last month, stumbling through the passages with mechanical precision but no soul. Lynn played it the way it was meant to be played, the way she had heard it in her mind 1,000 times while scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. Her eyes were closed now. She wasn't in the concert hall anymore. She was 7 years old again, ear pressed against that community center wall, but this time the music wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from her. All those years of listening, of absorbing, of teaching herself through walls and doorways and stolen moments. They were all pouring out through her fingers. The laughter in the room had died completely. Mr. Pemberton's smirk had vanished, replaced by something between confusion and shock. People who had been holding their phones up to mock her were now recording in genuine amazement. The casual chatter, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of feet, all of it had stopped. Lynn didn't notice. She was lost in the music now, traveling through memories and emotions she had kept locked away for decades. The Chopin piece reminded her of rain, of loneliness, of beauty found in sadness. Her fingers danced across the keys, coaxing out feelings that had no words. She transitioned without pause into a piece by Debussy, something dreamlike and flowing. The broken piano's flaws actually added something to it, a roughness that made it feel more real, more human. This wasn't the perfect, polished performance you'd hear from a concert pianist. This was raw and honest, music made by someone who understood what it meant to be broken and still find beauty anyway. In the front row, Dr. Helena Vasquez had tears running down her face. She was the director of the academy, a woman who had performed at Carnegie Hall, who had studied under masters in Vienna and Moscow. She had heard countless performances in her lifetime, from the world's most talented musicians. But she had never heard anything quite like this, because this wasn't just technical skill. This was something deeper. This was music made by someone who had spent 43 years hungry for it, someone who had absorbed it like breathing, someone for whom playing wasn't a career or a hobby, but a fundamental part of who they were. Lynn's rough hands, weathered from decades of cleaning solutions and hard labor, moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. Those calluses that had scrubbed 1,000 floors now pressed down on ivory with perfect sensitivity, finding exactly the right pressure for each note. Her fingers knew things that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The song she played now was something she had composed herself, though she didn't think of it that way. It was just the melody that played in her head when she rode the bus home, after work, when she lay in bed unable to sleep, when she stood at her kitchen window watching the sun set over the city. She had never written it down because she had never learned to read or write music. It existed only in her mind and her heart. It started gentle, like dawn breaking. Then it built slowly, layer upon layer of sound, each hand playing something different, but somehow perfectly together. The melody was Chinese in its soul, drawing from the folk songs of her childhood, but it had absorbed American influences too, jazz rhythms and blues notes that she had heard floating from car radios and apartment windows. The broken piano protested, occasionally a string buzzing here, a key clicking there, but these imperfections became part of the music itself, like a voice cracking with emotion at exactly the right moment. Lynn played with and through the brokenness, proving that perfection wasn't the only path to beauty. People in the crowd were openly crying now. The catering staff had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sound. Students who had been in the building practicing stopped what they were doing and made their way to the concert hall. Even the security guard at the front entrance left his post to listen. Lynn's song built to a crescendo, her hands moving faster now, passion overtaking precision. This was 4 decades of silence finding its voice. This was every dream deferred, every talent wasted, every moment of invisible labor in a world that didn't see her worth. This was anger and joy and grief and hope all mixed together, and transformed into something that transcended words. Then, just as suddenly as it had built up, the music softened. The melody returned to something simple, that folk song from the beginning, but changed now. Wiser, fuller. It slowed down, note by note, like a bird settling back to earth after flight. The final note hung in the air, sustained, until Lynn finally lifted her foot from the pedal and let it fade into silence. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. The silence was so complete that you could hear the sound of someone's breath catching, the rustle of fabric as someone wiped their eyes. Lynn sat perfectly still, her hands resting gently on the keys, her eyes still closed, not quite ready to return to reality. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, but it wasn't the polite golf clap of obligatory appreciation. It was real applause, loud and enthusiastic. Within seconds, everyone joined in. The sound built like a wave, and suddenly the entire room was on its feet applauding thunderously. Lynn opened her eyes slowly, and for a moment she looked confused, like she had forgotten where she was. She looked down at her hands on the piano keys, then up at the crowd of people standing and clapping for her. Her face showed pure bewilderment. This couldn't be for her. Cleaning ladies didn't get standing ovations, but it was real. All of it was real. Dr. Vasquez was pushing through the crowd, her makeup smeared from crying, her elegant composure completely abandoned. She reached Lynn and grabbed her by the shoulders, her voice urgent and thick with emotion. "Who taught you?" she demanded. "Where did you study? That was extraordinary. That was beyond extraordinary." Lynn's voice came out small and uncertain. barely audible over the continuing applause. "Nobody taught me, ma'am. I just listened. I've been listening my whole life." Dr. Vasquez stared at her like she was looking at something impossible. Something that shouldn't exist according to everything she knew about music and talent and training. Around them, people were pressing closer, everyone wanting to speak, to this cleaning woman who had just turned their understanding of the world upside down. Mr. Pemberton stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his face pale, his expensive wine forgotten in his hand. He had meant to create a joke, a moment of cruel entertainment. Instead, he had accidentally revealed something miraculous, and now he had to face what that said about him. Someone in the crowd was live streaming. Their phone had been recording the entire performance, and already people were sharing it. The video was spreading across social media platforms, jumping from account to account, gathering views and comments and shares with shocking speed. Within an hour, the hashtag would be trending. By morning, it would be national news. But Lynn didn't know any of that yet. She was still sitting at the broken piano, overwhelmed and confused, trying to understand how playing a few songs had somehow changed everything. Lynn didn't sleep at all that night. How could she? After the gala ended, after Dr. Vasquez had spent an hour asking her questions she barely knew how to answer, after the crowd had finally dispersed and she was allowed to go home, she sat in her small apartment staring at the wall until sunrise. Her phone, an old model she barely knew how to use beyond making calls, kept buzzing with notifications. She didn't understand what was happening. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Voicemails filling up her inbox. She turned it off, overwhelmed, and made herself a cup of tea with shaking hands. The next morning, when she arrived at the academy to start her cleaning shift, everything had changed. The security guard at the front entrance actually smiled at her and held the door open. He had never done that before. In 16 years, he had barely acknowledged her existence. "That was something special last night," he said. "Really something special." Lynn nodded nervously and hurried inside, not sure how to respond. But it didn't stop there. As she walked down the hallway toward the supply closet, students actually stopped to stare at her. Some of them whispered to each other, pointing. A few even approached her, their faces bright with excitement. "You're the piano lady," one girl said, her eyes wide. "I saw the video. Everyone's seen the video. You were amazing." Video? Lynn felt her stomach drop. Someone had recorded it. Of course someone had recorded it. Everyone had their phones out. But she hadn't really thought about what that meant, about where that video might go. She made it to the supply closet and closed the door behind her, leaning against it, trying to breathe normally. This was supposed to be her refuge, her quiet space where she prepared for the day's work. But today, even here, she couldn't escape the feeling that something enormous was happening, and she had no control over it. Dr. Vasquez found her there, 20 minutes later, still standing frozen with her mop in hand. "Lynn," the director said gently, knocking on the open door. "We need to talk. Do you have a moment?" They sat in Dr. Vasquez's office, a room Lynn had only ever entered to empty the trash and dust the bookshelves. Sitting here as a guest felt wrong, like she was breaking some invisible rule. Dr. Vasquez poured her coffee from an expensive-looking carafe and pushed the cup across the desk. "I need you to understand what's happening," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice kind but serious. "The video from last night has gone viral. Do you know what that means?" Lynn shook her head slowly. "It means millions of people have watched it. Right now, at this very moment, people all over the world are watching you play that piano. The major news networks have been calling all morning. They want to interview you. And that's not all." Dr. Vasquez pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were letters, emails printed out, all addressed to Lynn. 3 different music schools have offered you full scholarships: Juilliard, Berkeley, and the San Francisco Conservatory. These are the most prestigious music programs in the country, Lynn. They want you to study with them. There's also a performance invitation from Carnegie Hall, and a recording company wants to talk to you about making an album. Lynn stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. None of this made sense. These things didn't happen to people like her. These opportunities were for talented young people with bright futures. not 43-year-old cleaning women with gray hair and rough hands. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I'm nobody. I just played a song." "You played 5 songs," Dr. Vasquez corrected gently. "And you didn't just play them, Lynn. You made grown adults cry. You made people who have studied music their entire lives question everything they thought they knew about talent. What you did last night was extraordinary." The next few days passed in a blur that felt more like a nightmare than a dream come true. Reporters showed up at her apartment building. Camera crews camped outside the academy. Her old phone couldn't handle all the attention, so someone from the academy gave her a new smartphone that she had no idea how to operate. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted her story. They wanted to know about the village in China, about listening through the wall, about cleaning floors while students practiced around her. They wanted to turn her life into an inspiring narrative, a feel-good story about overcoming obstacles. But Lynn felt like she was drowning. The attention was suffocating. People grabbed her arm on the street to tell her how inspired they were. Strangers cried when they met her. She couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized. Her face was everywhere, on television, on websites, on social media platforms she didn't even know existed. One morning, a week after the gala, she found herself sitting in a television studio about to be interviewed on a national morning show. A makeup artist had done something to her face that made her look like a stranger in the mirror. They had given her clothes to wear, expensive clothes that felt stiff and uncomfortable. The bright lights made her eyes water. The host, a woman with perfect teeth and impossibly shiny hair, smiled at her like they were old friends. "Lynn, your story has touched millions of people around the world. What does it feel like to go from cleaning floors to being offered scholarships at the country's top music schools?" Lynn opened her mouth but couldn't find words. How could she explain that it felt terrifying, that she laid awake every night feeling like she was being buried alive under other people's expectations, that she missed the quiet of her morning routine, the peace of polishing pianos before anyone else arrived? "It's very overwhelming," she finally managed to say, her accent thick with nervousness. "I don't know if I deserve all this." The host's smile dimmed slightly with what looked like genuine concern. "But Lynn, you have an extraordinary gift. Don't you think you owe it to the world to share it?" That question haunted Lynn for days afterward. Did she owe the world anything? She had spent 43 years invisible, unnoticed, working hard and asking for nothing. Now suddenly everyone had opinions about what she should do with her life. People she had never met were telling her she had a responsibility to inspire others, to prove that dreams can come true, to become a symbol of hope. But what about what she wanted? The academy had offered her a position. Not cleaning anymore, but teaching. They wanted to create a special scholarship program for underprivileged students, immigrants and refugees who showed musical promise but couldn't afford traditional lessons. They wanted Lynn to be the face of it, the teacher who understood what it meant to be shut out of a world you loved. The music schools kept calling. Producers wanted to record her. Concert halls offered her performance slots. Someone even wanted to make a movie about her life. The attention was endless, relentless, and exhausting. 2 weeks after the gala, Lynn found herself back in the academy late at night, after everyone had gone home. She stood in the doorway of the concert hall, looking at the beautiful grand piano that she had polished so many times. They had told her she could play it whenever she wanted now. She had permission. She had more than permission. She had invitations, expectations, demands. But she found herself walking past the grand piano toward the broken upright that was still sitting in the corner. After the viral video, the academy had decided to keep it as a symbol. They were even planning to restore it, to make it perfect. Lynn sat down at the broken piano and put her hands on the keys. They felt familiar, comfortable, like old friends. She played softly, just for herself. A simple melody that nobody was recording, nobody was analyzing, nobody was crying over. And for the first time in 2 weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The door to the hall opened quietly. Dr. Vasquez stepped inside but didn't approach. She just stood there, listening. When Lynn finished playing, the director walked over and sat on the bench beside her. "You don't want any of this, do you?" Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "The fame, the attention, the performances?" Lynn shook her head, tears running down her face. "I just wanted to play. That's all I ever wanted, just to play." Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting gently on Lynn's shoulder. "Then maybe that's exactly what you should do. But on your own terms, what do you mean? You don't owe anyone anything, Lynn. Not the news stations, not the recording companies, not even the people who are inspired by you. You get to choose what your life looks like. So tell me, if you could have anything, what would you want? Lynn thought about the 7-year-old girl with her ear pressed against the wall. What had that little girl really wanted? Not fame, not wealth, not even recognition. She had just wanted to understand music, to learn its language, to be part of its world. I want to learn, Lynn said slowly. All these years I've been teaching myself, guessing, figuring things out in my head. But there's so much I don't know. Music theory, composition, all the things I missed. I want to learn those things. And then what? Lynn looked at the broken piano, thinking about all the children in the world who were standing outside walls, listening. Then I want to teach. Kids like I was, the ones nobody sees, the ones who love music but think it's not for them. Dr. Vasquez smiled, real and warm. Now that sounds like a plan worth making. Lynn's decision surprised everyone. When the news stations called asking for interviews, she politely declined. When the recording companies pushed for meetings, she said no. When Carnegie Hall sent another invitation, she thanked them but explained she wasn't ready. The world wanted her to become something spectacular overnight. But Lynn had spent 43 years being invisible. She wasn't going to rush into being seen. Instead, she accepted a modest scholarship from the academy, not as a full-time student competing with 18-year-olds fresh out of high school, but as a special learner who would study part-time while also teaching. Dr. Vasquez had created a position specifically for her, something that had never existed before. The deal was simple. Lynn would take classes 3 days a week, learning music theory, composition, and technique from the academy's professors. The other 2 days, she would teach a new program for students who couldn't afford traditional lessons. Children from immigrant families, kids from low-income neighborhoods, anyone who had been standing outside the wall listening because they couldn't afford to come inside. And she insisted on one more thing. She wanted to keep her cleaning job at least 2 mornings a week. People thought she was crazy. Why would she clean floors when she could be performing or studying? But Lynn understood something they didn't. Those quiet morning hours, moving through empty hallways with her mop and her thoughts, that's when she felt most like herself. That's when melodies came to her, when she could think clearly without the noise of other people's expectations. The transition wasn't easy. Sitting in music theory class with a textbook in front of her, learning to read the notes she had only ever heard in her head, felt like learning to read all over again. Her classmates were kind but couldn't quite hide their curiosity. Here was this cleaning lady who could play like an angel, but didn't know the difference between a major and minor scale by name. Her theory professor, an elderly man who had taught at the academy for 40 years, was patient with her. After the first class, he asked her to stay behind. You know all of this already, he told her, gesturing at the textbook. You just don't know the words for it. Your ear has taught you what most students take years to learn. My job is just to give you the vocabulary to explain what you already understand. He was right. Once Lynn learned the names for things, the concepts clicked into place instantly. A major chord, she realized, was that happy sound she had always associated with sunshine. A minor chord was the sad, rainy feeling. Circle of fifths was just the pattern she had naturally followed when moving between songs. She had been speaking music fluently her whole life. Now she was finally learning to read and write it. Teaching was harder than she expected, but more rewarding than anything she had ever done. Her first class had 12 students ranging from age 8 to 16. They came from all over the city. Some had parents who worked 3 jobs. Some were refugees who barely spoke English. Some came from families where music was considered a waste of time, a luxury they couldn't afford. Lynn looked at their faces on that first day and saw herself in every single one of them. I'm not going to teach you the way most people teach music, she told them, sitting at the old upright piano they had moved into her classroom. I'm not going to start with scales and boring exercises. I'm going to teach you the way I learned, by listening, by feeling, by understanding that music isn't something you have to be rich or educated to make. It's something that lives inside all of us. She played for them that first day, the same folk song her mother used to sing. Then she asked each student to share a song from their own family, their own culture. A boy from Ethiopia sang a melody his grandmother had taught him. A girl from Mexico remembered a lullaby. A quiet kid from Vietnam hummed something his father whistled while cooking dinner. Lynn taught them to find those melodies on the piano, note by note. She taught them that their own music, the songs from their homes and their histories, were just as valuable as Mozart or Beethoven. She taught them that having an accent when you spoke didn't mean you couldn't speak music fluently. Word spread about her class. More students wanted to join than she could accommodate. Parents would wait outside her classroom door, sometimes crying, thanking her for seeing something in their children that the world had overlooked. It reminded Lynn why she had said no to all the fame and attention. This right here was what mattered. 6 months after the viral video, something unexpected happened. Mr. Pemberton, the man who had set up the cruel joke that started everything, requested a meeting with Lynn. She almost refused. Part of her still felt the humiliation of that moment, being put on display for everyone's entertainment. But Dr. Vasquez encouraged her to hear him out. They met in a small office at the academy. Mr. Pemberton looked different than he had at the gala. Smaller somehow, less sure of himself. He didn't meet her eyes at first. "I need to apologize," he said quietly. "What I did that night was cruel and wrong. I was showing off, being mean for entertainment, and I've been sick about it ever since. Watching that video, seeing what I almost destroyed by treating you that way, it's haunted me." Lynn didn't know what to say. She had been angry at him for weeks, but sitting here now, seeing genuine remorse on his face, the anger felt less important than it once had. "I want to make it right," he continued. "I've established a fund, a substantial one, for your teaching program, for scholarships for any student who needs help accessing music education. It's anonymous officially, but I wanted you to know it came from me. It's not enough to fix what I did, but maybe it's a start." Lynn thought about this for a moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "Your son, he plays piano, doesn't he?" Mr. Pemberton looked confused. "Yes, but he's not very good. Honestly, he doesn't even enjoy it much. I push him because I think he should have these opportunities." "Maybe he needs a different teacher," Lynn said. "Maybe he needs to find his own reason to love music, not yours. Send him to my class. I'll teach him for free." Mr. Pemberton's eyes widened. "You would do that? After what I did to you?" "Music isn't about revenge," Lynn said simply. "It's about connection. If I can help your son connect with it in his own way, maybe that's worth more than any apology." A year after the viral video, Lynn's life had found a new rhythm. She studied in the mornings, taught in the afternoons, and still cleaned the academy 2 mornings a week. She never did perform at Carnegie Hall. She never made that album. She turned down most interviews, though she occasionally agreed to talk to small publications or local news if they wanted to feature her teaching program. The viral video was still out there, still being shared, still inspiring people, but Lynn had learned to separate herself from it. That was a moment, one performance on one night. It wasn't her whole story. Her whole story was being written now every day, in the faces of the students she taught and the music she continued to learn. The broken piano had been restored as the academy planned. It sat in the hallway outside her classroom now, polished and tuned to perfection. But Lynn rarely played it anymore. She preferred the slightly out-of-tune upright in her classroom, the one with the sticky keys and the squeaky pedal. It reminded her that perfection wasn't the point. Connection was the point. Expression was the point. Finding your voice, broken or perfect, and using it to speak your truth. That was everything. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the academy was empty and the city was soft with weekend calm, Lynn sat at the grand piano in the concert hall. The beautiful instrument she had polished 1,000 times as a cleaning woman. She played for no one but herself. No cameras recording, no crowd watching. Just her and the music and the decades of silence that had finally found its voice. She played the folk song from her childhood, the one her mother used to sing. But this time, she had written it down in proper notation, arranged it with the theory she had learned, turned it into something that could be taught to her students. The personal had become universal. The private had become shareable. Her story, once invisible, was now a bridge that others could walk across to find their own voices. Somewhere in the city, a child was probably standing outside a wall right now, listening to music they couldn't afford to learn. But because of what Lynn had built, there was now a door waiting for them, a door that would open, a door that would welcome them in. Lynn finished playing and sat quietly in the empty hall, her rough hands resting on the smooth keys. She thought about that 7-year-old girl with her ear pressed against the wall, and she wished she could go back and tell her something important. Your patience will be worth it. Your listening will become your teaching. Your silence will become your song. And that broken piano they give you as a joke will be the instrument that changes everything. Not because it will make you famous, but because it will remind you that broken things can still make beautiful music. And sometimes, the most extraordinary performances happen when we're just trying to survive, when we're just trying to speak our truth, when we're just being exactly who we were always meant to be.